Hi everyone, my name is Isabela and my project looks at how recent US tariffs have affected Florida's specialty coffee industry. I focused on two main things Florida roasters depend on: Colombian coffee beans and the packaging materials that mostly come from China. I picked this topic partly because of my family ties to Colombian coffee, but also because Florida's coffee scene is so tied to Latin America that any tariff changes show up quickly. What my project looks at. My main question was how these new tariffs, especially the ones introduced or increased in 2025, are shaping the cost and supply chains for Florida coffee businesses. These tariffs weren't aimed specifically at coffee, but since Florida depends heavily on imports, they've ended up affecting the industry in a big way. Why Florida is so exposed? Florida's coffee market is growing really fast. Motor Intelligence says the state's growth rate is over 6% through 2030, which is higher than the national trend. Most of the roasters here are small, independent shops working on pretty thin margins. They import specialty beans in small batches and rely a lot on imported packaging, so even moderate cost increases hit them hard. Trade path overview. To picture how everything moves, Colombian beans typically enter through Miami or Tampa ports, then go straight to Florida roasters and eventually to consumers. Packaging takes a totally different path coming from China to US suppliers and then to Florida businesses. Tariffs hit at both points, which means there's no real part of the chain where these companies can catch a break. What tariffs are involved? On the coffee side, the US imposed a 10% tariff on imported beans, including Colombian coffee. Intelligence Coffee reported that even big companies like Smuckers saw a 22% drop in profit because of tariff-related increases in green coffee costs. On the packaging side, tariffs went up on Chinese industrial imports. Aluminum and steel tariffs reached around 50%, which impacts anything made with foil or metal. A packaging company estimated that a 10% tariff could add about $10,000 to a $100,000 shipment. Why these tariffs were imposed? These policies weren't created with coffee in mind. The packaging tariffs were part of a push to support domestic manufacturing, especially metals and industrial materials. The coffee tariff was included in a broader set of foreign goods tariffs. Coffee just happened to be caught in the middle. But even if coffee wasn't the target, the effects are real for Florida roasters. Why these tariffs matter for Florida? This matters a lot here because Florida businesses don't have easy substitutes. Roasters rely on Colombian beans for their flavor identity. Most of the affordable packaging materials still come from China. Axios reported that Miami coffee shops are already thinking about raising prices because of the rising costs of beans and packaging together. Impact on Colombian coffee imports. That 10% tariff raises the cost of every bag of Colombian coffee. And if big companies like Smuckers feel it, smaller roasters with less margin definitely feel it. They don't have bulk discounts or big financial cushions. These price increases eventually reach consumers because shops have to raise retail prices to stay in business. Impact on packaging from China. On the packaging side, the tariffs on aluminum and steel pushed up the cost of bags, boxes, lids, foil, and anything with metal layers. Packaging Dive explained how manufacturers are either absorbing the increases or passing them to buyers, and most of the time it gets passed on, so roasters end up paying more for beans and more for the materials to package those beans. Combined pressure. When you add both cost increases together, it creates a margin squeeze that's really tough for small businesses. They can't switch to cheaper beans without losing the flavors their customers expect, and they can't cut out packaging. Some shops in Miami are already adjusting prices to keep up. How businesses are responding. Some companies in the US are trying to pivot away from Chinese suppliers and look at packaging manufacturers in places like Mexico or Europe. But switching suppliers takes time and it isn't cheap. Intelligence Coffee even described this year's supply chain as chaos because so many businesses were scrambling to adjust. Roasters have less flexibility when it comes to sourcing beans because they depend on Colombian flavor profiles. International business concept. This ties into comparative advantage. Colombia is naturally better at producing high-quality coffee because of its climate and experience. Tariffs disrupt that advantage and raise U.S. consumer prices. Florida's geography plays into this too, because the state heavily depends on imports flowing through its ports. Who is affected? A lot of groups feel the impact: Florida roasters, local coffee shops, packaging suppliers, Colombian exporters, and consumers. Even small changes in the supply chain can have ripple effects because so many people are involved along the way. How trade flows have shifted. Some businesses are reducing order sizes, delaying shipments, or looking outside China for packaging. In some cases, the slower or more expensive imports are affecting the overall growth of Florida coffee scene. Why small businesses struggle more? Small roasters don't have the buying power of big national chains. They can't store huge amounts of inventory and they don't have as much leverage on contracts. They feel higher costs immediately and have fewer ways to adjust. Recommendations for Florida businesses. There are a few helpful strategies. One is sourcing packaging from Latin America or Europe to avoid tariff-heavy suppliers. Another is forming cooperative buying groups so multiple small roasters can negotiate better pricing. Long-term contracts with Colombian exporters can help stabilize bean pricing. Recommendations for policymakers. For policymakers, tariff exclusions for essential imports, like food-related inputs, could help a lot. Another idea is to support programs for small roasters who can't absorb sudden increases. More stable trade policy would also make planning much easier for these businesses. Key takeaway. To wrap up, these tariffs weren't aimed at the coffee industry, but Florida's roasters are feeling the consequences anyway. Costs are up on both beans and packaging. Supply chains are disrupted and small businesses are facing tougher decisions about prices and sourcing. Until something changes, the pressure is likely to continue. Thank you for listening to my presentation.